How often do you feel like you're the only person in the world who is going through what you're currently going through? Looking out into the streets, you can't help but see a large body of rats chasing an imaginary piece of cheese, which represents their hopes, dreams, and aspirations that you know ends up being laid on a trap in the end. Still though, maybe a part of you wishes you were one of those rats. To be a person who can fit in, do what they're told, make friends easily, and be content with their ignorance. If you've had tormenting thoughts fueled by becoming too aware of your own self-sabotaging behaviors, then you may have a close resemblance to the main character in Fyodor Dostoevsky's book, Notes from the Underground. This philosophical piece of fiction, which is considered one of the earliest works of existentialism, before existentialism was really even considered a philosophy, could help you better understand why highly intelligent people seem to have such a hard time making friends. And it could give us some insight into why we are seeing such a massive uprise in loneliness throughout society. So let's dive into the book and try to figure this out. Notes from the Underground follows a first-person narration of an unnamed man whom we will refer to as the Underground Man. The Underground Man has locked himself away from the world in solitary confinement and laments over his struggles with being hyper-aware of his existence. The first part of this book is this very long monologue, which is basically just a single speech or discussion, and it talks about the disconnect between human nature and the laws of nature. And I think if we really want to understand what the Underground Man has become too conscious of, it's best to first look at how he explains the foolishness of mankind's attempt to become more rational and reasonable over the years. He states, "They say that Cleopatra was fond of sticking gold pins into her slave girls' breasts and derived gratification from their screams and writhings. You will say that that was in the comparatively barbarous times, that these are barbarous times too, because also, comparatively speaking, pins are stuck in even now. That though man has now learned to see more clearly than in barbarous ages, he's still far from having learnt to act as reason and science would dictate. But yet you are fully convinced that he will be sure to learn when he gets rid of certain old bad habits, and when common sense and science have completely re-educated human nature and turned it in a normal direction." Here the Underground Man is stating his contempt for society's push to rely more heavily on science and rationality in order to conduct our behavior. During this time in Russia, when he wrote the book, there was an increase in popularity of nihilism and rational egoism. Many were convinced that if we just figured out what was in our best interest, we would always act in our best interest, and most, if not all of our problems would be solved. But he argues that this completely goes against human nature, and that as much as we think civilizations have stopped the atrocities of the past, or at least minimized them, we've only made them much more subtle. In any case, civilization has made mankind, if not more bloodthirsty, at least more vilely, more loathsomely bloodthirsty. In old days, he saw justice in bloodshed, and with his conscience at peace, exterminated those he thought proper. Now we do think bloodshed abominable, and yet we engage in this abomination, and with more energy than ever. Which is worse? Decide that for yourselves. As much as we know what the right thing is, the Underground Man is aware that sometimes we will do the most irrational things simply to prove to ourselves that we are human and we have free will to do what is not rational and reasonable. Or sometimes it's simply because we just can't help it. Another great example of this in fiction, which I'm bringing up purely for my own enjoyment, is the character and the actions of Griffith in the manga Berserk. Griffith is a man so cunning and so intelligent that he is able to persuade thousands of people to die for his cause, to one day have a kingdom. And just when he is right within reach of attaining it, he goes and decides to fuck it all up. Some say it's because, he couldn't control his emotions for guts, or there's some other sort of stable reason behind it, but honestly, it doesn't make any sense. He threw away his whole dream just because he became emotional, and it completely goes against the character that was built up in this story. And so that means that, maybe Griffith just did it because he wanted to exercise his own free will. So this is the predicament that the Underground Man believes highly intelligent individuals find themselves in. The average person is not overly aware of their irrationality and the millions of complex reasonings behind their actions, and simply believes most of, if not everything they do, is according to the laws of reason. Either that, or they'll just follow the ideology they are being told without questioning it, because someone of a higher stature told them it was the right thing to do. But the intelligent man knows that his decisions are absurdly complex, and that he often acts completely unreasonably, and to try and find the most sensible, reasonable approach will lead to a paralysis of inaction. And even though he knows that trying to analyze the unreasonable and make it reasonable is a waste of mental resources, he still decides to take part in the madness. He states, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man." I was lying when I said just now that I was a spiteful official. I was lying from spite. I was conscious every moment in myself of many, very many elements absolutely opposite to that. I felt them positively swarming in me, these opposite elements. I knew that they had been swarming in me all my life and craving some outlet from me, but I would not let them, purposely would not let them come out. It was not only that I could not become spiteful, I did not know how to become anything. Neither spiteful nor kind, neither a rascal nor an honest man, neither a hero nor an insect. Now I am living out my life in my corner, taunting myself with the spiteful and useless consolation that an intelligent man cannot become anything seriously, and it is only the fool who becomes anything. I think these lines best summarize an aggrandized version of someone who's become too aware of their irrationality and unreasonableness and is unable to form an identity because they're too hyper aware of themselves. It's kind of like the person who knows it's not in their best interest to buy that bag of chips after they've just eaten 3,000 calories of Burger King. They're completely aware of the chemicals and processed garbage that leads to them feeling unwell, and they even know that the reason they want to eat it is because this food has been genetically modified to be as addicting to our brains as possible, and yet they still buy the bag of chips. As opposed to the fool who is ignorant of these decisions and buys the bag of chips just because, the intelligent man ruminates endlessly over his poor decision, feeling intense guilt while being in the exact same physical state as the fool. So if we apply the line of thinking from the underground man to the difficulty intelligent people have with making friends, it's that intelligent people, or rather hyper-conscious people, are so consumed by their own egoic thoughts and analyzations of the world and others in it that they can't even exercise the simple present-mindedness needed to have a casual conversation with others. They feel extremely detached from the normal human being because they're too caught up in the fact that everyone else is ignoring the more negative, irrational sides of their nature, especially when greeting human beings whom they've just met. Highly intelligent individuals can sense that deep down these, "Hello, how's everyone doing?" and "I'm doing really well, let's stay positive," are forced attempts at us trying to always do what is supposedly in our best interest. And the underground man can't bring himself to take part in the show, not only because he's too far in his own head, but also because he firmly believes that sometimes it's in our best interest to not act in our best interest. However, I don't think this is the full explanation for why loneliness is so apparent throughout modern society. And although I've explained a lot of the more obvious reasons why communities are now starting to dwindle in my Rise of Individualism video, I think there's something deeper going on here. But before we dive into that, I want to encourage you guys to listen to the audiobook Notes from the Underground as I did using today's sponsor, Audible. Audible is the home of storytelling, and it's the platform that I have now been using for over 6 years. As an Audible member, you can choose one title a month to keep from the entire catalog, including the latest bestsellers and new releases. Members also get access to a growing selection of included audiobooks, Audible originals, and podcasts. And when you sign up to get a free title from Audible using my link, you can download their included titles anywhere at any time you want. Personally, I'm using Audible when I'm cleaning my apartment, going for a walk, or when I have to go on a drive for more than 15 minutes so I can quiet my incessant thoughts surrounding the absurd nature of humanity. Notes from the Underground is by far one of the best titles and narrations that I've listened to on Audible. There's a few versions on there, but I prefer this one narrated by George Goodall. I'm gonna try to get into more of the audiobook's themes in the rest of this video, but please do yourself a favor and listen to the whole audiobook on Audible after this video. If you want to try Audible and get one title for free when you sign up, which I suggest you use on Notes from the Underground, you can use my link, which is audible.com/colehastings. That's the first link in the description, or you can text Cole Hastings, that's all one word, to 500-500. So the theme I want to continue exploring from the book, which I will use to both exemplify why there's a general lack of connection in the modern Western world and critique the underground man's beliefs about human beings, is the dangers of trying to reach a utopian society. The whole book, Notes from the Underground, is essentially an attack on contemporary Russian philosophy, especially Nikolai Chervanevsky's What Is to Be Done, which advocates for a utilitarian, socialist utopia in order to solve humanity's endless shrew of issues. The Underground Man believes that even if we were to reach a utopian society, or the Crystal Palace as he refers to it in the book, we would find a way to create more problems and make ourselves miserable again solely for the purpose of saving our sense of humanity. Shower upon him every earthly blessing, drown him in bliss so that nothing but bubbles would dance on the surface of his bliss, as on a sea. And even then, every man, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer libel, would play you some loathsome trick. He would even risk his cakes and would deliberately desire the most fatal rubbish, the most uneconomical absurdity, simply to introduce into all this positive rationality his fatal, fantastic element, simply in order to prove to himself that men are still men and not piano keys. By saying piano keys here, he's referring to something that has no governing power over its fate. A predetermined organism that follows a path carved out by what we believe to be the best for our well-being. And I think this is pretty obviously apparent in modern society. We rely very heavily on facts, statistics, and empirical evidence brought about by the scientific method in order to figure out what produces the best possible result for the most amount of people. And we condemn anyone who chooses to go about doing things in their own way. We have tried to strive ever closer to creating a place where everyone has equal opportunities and everyone can live in a wealth of material abundance. And yet, as we edge closer and closer to this fantasy realm, this hyper-reality created by the online world, and eradicate more and more problems, the more there is a feeling of general untrustworthiness between individuals. When we spend our lives chasing this utopia of dreams, pleasure, and happiness built upon the rationality of the universe, we increasingly try to avoid those emotions of insecurity, disgust, narcissism, and absurdity that the Underground Man represents. And deep down, I think we all know we possess these traits to some extent. But since our society increasingly enforces us to think and act in a very certain way, a way that is in all of our best interests, we lose touch with what makes all of us human. After all, how can one truly connect with somebody and feel as if they know someone deeply if they cannot see the same things they dislike about themselves in another human? And after seeing those dislikes, still continue to accept that person has those flaws and accept them for who they are. And how are relationships built if not upon trusting somebody to accept and listen to your vulnerabilities and things that are considered more unpleasant about human nature? Those are the things that certainly feel the most human to me. Trust in a society dies when the people within that society can't admit that they share some of the traits of the Underground Man, or can't at least express those parts of themselves to some extent. But more and more, this side of showing things is being avoided or ignored entirely. However, unlike the Underground Man, who believes that only highly intelligent, conscious humans are the ones who suffer from this detachment from society, I believe that most people are innately aware that they need to express more of themselves if they are to make more friends. And in that sense, the intellectual that the Underground Man talks about, that he considers himself to be, isn't really that intelligent at all, because he can't even express that part of himself. I do think that the average person feels that appearing too perfect is disingenuous, and that ironically, we should all be a little more nasty if we really want to get along. And by saying nasty, I don't necessarily mean being nasty to each other, but we should encourage people to open up about their biggest insecurities, fears, and things they suffered through, and learn to embrace them. As the Underground Man puts it, suffering is the sole origin of consciousness. We need to suffer because suffering is how we know we're truly alive, and it's what makes us human and not robots. Great pain can often lead us to wish for death, to question the value of our existence, and thus to realize the absurdity of life. And yet we choose to stay, to take on the suffering and take on nature. What I believe we really want is not a perfect world, not a utopian world, but a real world. And that means that sometimes we do things that make absolutely zero sense rationally, so we can impose our own will on the universe. But I think the biggest mistake one can take away from this book is to think that the Underground Man's discourse is always right and true. I think that Dostoevsky created this character to show you exactly what you should not do when you become hyper-aware of your irrationality and your consciousness. You can't continue to keep overanalyzing every single predicament, wondering which decision will provide the best outcome, and think of every contradiction to the point where you become nobody. And you can't see yourself as a separate entity from the rest of humanity, thinking that you know so much more than everyone else out there. That is one of the most egotistical things you can do. You have to be rational when it matters, you have to be firm in your decisions, and you have to stand by those decisions even when they don't make sense. You have to voluntarily accept the suffering that consciousness gives you and embrace it with open arms. And to your best effort, try to influence people to enjoy all aspects of their lives, both the pleasant and unpleasant. You're probably always going to continue to do insensible things simply just to prove to yourself that you're a human being who has free will. Sometimes that is what is in your best interest. Otherwise, you're just a lifeless zombie with no real character traits and no humanity. And maybe if a little bit of chaos was encouraged, knowing that human nature is an entirely different animal than what we think we can predict with certainty through rationality and science, we would all feel like we had some parts of ourselves that we could share with each other. But who knows, maybe you'll do the exact opposite of what I'm saying here, just to prove to yourself that you're still a human being and not a piano key. Thank you as always to my patrons on Patreon. This is a platform where you can talk to me one-on-one over the phone and support the channel. Link in the description to that. And if you're in the business of trying to embrace suffering more and learn to love it, check out this video. Might help you with that. Now I'm heading out. Love you guys. Peace.